Today, it's Edwin's Monday evening property rant. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, where I posts covering finance and property news. Now, I know it's a holiday, but that doesn't stop Edwin. He's back for another rant. Hi, Edwin. Welcome back. Is it the King's or the Queen's birthday? And why don't we have it in the UK? I want to recount.
He took my thunder. He took my thunder, Martin. That was going to be my opening line. I just want to question: why do we celebrate? Why do we celebrate the King's birthday after I got told today, hey, it's not the Queen's birthday anymore. It's the King's birthday. Why do we celebrate the King's birthday and you guys don't?
It is really quite weird, I have to say. It really is quite weird. But anyway, I suppose any excuse for a holiday.
Well, I mean, this is it. Australia, right? The land of opportunities. Any opportunity you get to take a day off, well, you take it. It's not enough that you're working from home. A lot of the people are working from home, and that's one of the reasons why Dutton didn't get in, right? Because he was talking about calling for people to go back to the offices. Hey, but hey, let's not, let's stay at home. Or power to you if you get the opportunity. I know my daughter works from home. I think it's 2 or 3 days a week, and I give her a call at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm thinking she's at work, and she says, "Oh, sorry, I didn't pick up, Dad. I was still asleep."
Well, I'll tell you, I was one of the early workers from home because I've run my business from home for 12 or 13 years now. And of course, when the lockdown came, it was just like business normal for me because I always communicate with everybody via Zoom and online. So for me, it's not a huge change. But it is interesting, isn't it, how people are grizzling that the central business districts are really quiet and, we've got lots of office accommodation. We should force people back. The truth is that boat has sailed.
Yeah, and this is if you recall, Martin, back in early 2020, we called it. We knew what was gonna happen, and we also discussed back then, early in 2020, that we were talking about what the aftermath of that would be, and that was going to be a transition or a repositioning of companies, because they were going to be saying, look. In the employees' statuses, because we said back then that once they realized that, hold on a minute, we can outsource a lot of the work. If people wanted to do it from home, well, they could do it remotely over in other countries of the world. And in other countries of the world, they guess what? They get charged a lot less. And this is what we've seen and we've been discussing in the show, the rise of the power of the buying power of the silent tigers and how much money they made during the lockdowns with regards to their property markets, and how that's turned into a pile of cash that is now finding its way into Australia and predominantly into Sydney, and how that's changed a lot of the markets in the northwest west regions. So this is something that we've been on point for a very, very long time. Now you've got the situation where my understanding, and I mean those Googleites can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a huge restructuring with Google, and again all those bodies that still work remotely, because now as they're saying, managers that we talk to and we've do business with, in terms of they've been clients of ours over the years, and what they're telling us is that they're cutting off the fat. So it stands to reason, and you start to question how many more companies are trimming the fat and utilizing that excuse to basically pay people less if they want to stay on, or basically give them the marching orders because of that dynamic. Now, we know, and that is the other thing. Like people sort of wonder, and they ask me, but and when we see a lot of locals buying as well, yeah. Well, you also got to see the employment numbers with regard to the people that work in the local governments, the LGA public servants, that work in LGAs, in state governments and federal. So that's, as I keep on saying to a lot of people, and say on the show, if you want to survive if you want to survive into the future, you become one of two things. You either become a real estate agent or a politician. So that's that's the future.
Well, that's exactly right. And it's interesting, isn't it, that a lot of the old office accommodation is now being repurposed, and it's happening in the UK and in Australia and other places too, because they've got all this building that's now not being used. Of course, the question is whether it's very purposeful to do that. But it's part of a broader story. And in fact, I made a show over the weekend called Property Lies, Distortions and Social Consequences, right? Because for me, the real fallout here are actually some of the social consequences, some of the things we've been talking about. So, for example, the idea that people actually are working at home more, that the central business districts are actually decaying. But I also highlighted something else, which I think is really important. If you look carefully, people who are buying property tend to be more wealthy and tend to be older. So there's a real pincer movement going on at the moment with regard to younger people and their inability to get into the property market. And I think this is something which, unfortunately, isn't really being spoken about in the right way. The Labour government's going to allow you to go with a 5% deposit rather than 20% deposit, but that's really not going to move the dial, and probably will put prices up at the bottom end too. And, recent articles suggest that, the insane pay rises that you need if you want to buy in Sydney was a recent article, and I think that's quite absolutely appropriate, because today, relative to previously, incomes relative to home prices are just going the wrong way, and the same also here with regard to Queensland. There's a horrible gap emerging, and now with the expectation of some, at least, that property prices are going to go higher again because rates are going to get cut, the bottom line is it's going to be harder and harder, particularly for young people, to be able to get into the market. So more people are going to get priced down. And I know everyone's going to say, oh, no, the problem is supply. No, supply. This is the chief executive, Andrew Irwin, said, well, supply is the issue. No, supply is a small part of the problem. But the real part of the problem, Edwin, is that incomes and house prices have just gone in two different directions. And so it's harder and harder, particularly for locals, to be able to get into the market. And I don't see that changing. I mean, I know people are saying rates are coming down, but I'm not sure that's necessarily going to help, because I think what we're going to see is the squeeze on the ability to be able to actually get in the property market, unless, of course, you actually have intergenerational wealth. I made a show earlier on talking about the property market python swallowing the equity elephant, because there is actually a lot of equity out there, but that equity is sitting amongst older households. And of course, some of the baby boomers are going to fall off the perch, and intergenerational wealth shift through that could be there. But again, a lot of that money is coming down into the over 50s. So it's not necessarily going to help those youngsters who are trying to get into the market. And a quick plug here, I'm going to make a show on Wednesday, in fact, where I'm going to talk specifically about this, and I'm going to get Harry Dent to come on and Troy Harris to talk about what's really happening here, because this is part of a global economic problem that we've got. Hi, it's Martin North here. I would like you to join me and my special guests, Harry Dent and Troy Harris, for a critical conversation on what's really happening in the global economy and what action you can take now to protect and take control and build your wealth. Property's under pressure. Central banks are still printing. Trade tariff pressures are still there. There's the ongoing wars, and the global economy has us undeniably in uncharted territory. Markets feel increasingly disconnected from reality. So that's why I've invited economist and author Harry Dent and financial innovator Troy Harris to join me for a practical, honest conversation about what's happening, where things might be headed next, and how you can take control of your finances, whether you're retired and looking to protect your nest egg, actively investing and wanting smarter options, or just starting out and wondering where to begin. This session is for you. Whilst we can't control the markets, we sure can take advantage of the opportunities that these uncertain times are creating. You can lock in your seat using the link below in the morning or the evening sessions next Wednesday, June the 11th. I look forward to seeing you there. This will be one of the most important events I've been hosting for a while. We've got massive amounts of debt being pumped into the system. We've got bigger mortgages. We've got this skewing towards older generations and their ability to be able to get into the property market. And we've governments still throwing money to try and actually give the illusion of solving a problem which they're not even close to solving. So to my mind, this is getting more and more like a significant risk. And with those higher interest rates now, I think of the past and rates cutting, et cetera, and the expectation that we might see rates of around 3.5%, for example. This is one of the recent articles. This is Warren Hogan talking, and so he was called quite recently for no cuts, but now he's suggesting that rates could get cut again, and other people are saying it too. So we are at a really interesting turning point, but I'm not sure it's good for society, and I'm worried about some of these societal issues that we're seeing here.
But you know what this reminds me of, man, or gives me the imagery of, and that is, there's a raging bushfire in the Blue Mountains, and then the local fire brigade calls the neighborhood and says, "Listen, can you all piss on the in and try to put the fire out?" That's what it looks like to me. That's what it is. I mean, if I was a cartoonist, I'd draw that cartoon and I put whose face.
I'd actually take it slightly further, Edwin. I suspect that it's not just that; it's actually pouring a bit more petrol around the edge. We're going to expand it slightly more.
Let's go one step further, right? Let's go one step further. First, you go to the pub, right? You get a few shots of tequila, and then you go and try and piss on the fire, so to put it out.
Oh,
so, the burning sensation. So look, there's a lot happening. There's a lot happening, and this is where obviously we've got limited time to discuss things, and it's interesting how we've got the dynamics of the older generation now about to close businesses because the younger generation don't want to take over. The younger generation want to live in these bigger homes that where they grew up. I mean, through no fault of their own. They've been priced out because now you've got, as you say, you've got this compression between from all sides and they're all fighting for the same dwellings. You've got the empty nesters or retirees, whatever you want to call them, boomers, whatever. But they don't want to move out of the area, so they're going after the smaller homes in the suburbs or even your duplexes or small builds. In the areas because they want to stay close to where they've spent the last 40, 50, 60 years. And obviously, so they're pushing prices up on the lower end of the scale in those markets. And then you've got obviously your new migrants, you've got your new money, you've got your investors, and said for a very, very long time, the poor bastards that keep on getting thrown under the bus are your first-time buyers because the government thinks that by giving them 5,000 or by giving them equity share, by giving them this, by giving them that, they're going to get in housing and they're going to buy votes. And it's that hamster running on that wheel that keeps on going around and around and thinking that it's going to get to the other side of the room. It's crazy, but there's all these things that are playing out, all these dynamics that are playing out, and yet you've got the mainstream, you've got general commentators on social media or on different platforms all over the place talking shit because they're not at grassroots levels. They don't understand. They take one particular point or reference, one auction, one sale. And they make a big song and dance about it without really analysing what's going on. And this is where I really think that our viewers and our followers get a real treat because we try to bring as much as we can from all angles. What the movers and the shakers are in the property arena in the Sydney market. And we've said, we've identified quite a lot of movers and shakers, and the people that really move and shake markets, and the different groups and the whys and the hows. So it's really interesting that it's for on face value for a newcomer into the market, they can get bowled over. They can get hoodwinked into buying a lemon quite easily. They can get distracted, and they can, literally, buy into something that's, as you said, that's going to financially going to absolutely devastate them. But at the end of the day, unless we, like, what we say, unless we look at things holistically, you're really not going to get a picture. You can try and keep ahead of the current, by following the show and going over the stuff that you share on that. We share on the Monday Evening Property Rants, and other podcasts that you have as well, and other experts that come on as well. You can, try and keep ahead of the different currents. But it's very difficult, and it's very hard. And then you've got the industry fighting against anything that would remotely give an ounce of hope, or that would remotely give an ounce of, shed light or clarity into what the markets are really doing. And you've got a mess on your hands, and that's what we've got. So it's interesting how you brought up earlier on. You brought up the space that you made, and also the slides that you just shared earlier on, because obviously we're going to be discussing about some of those trends that are now happening in the whys. Why we can see ahead of time. It's not like I've got a crystal ball, or it's not like I've got a direct line with property Jesus. It's simply the fact that we look at the trends, look at what people are saying, what they're doing, and can jump on board with the discussions, because of the diversity of languages that we have in our team, and we're able to look at the shifts and changes, also because of the experience that we've had in the industry. So yeah, it's rather fascinating, and this is why we have what we have, man.
Yeah, and I think we should touch immediately on the concept of the new money, right? Because what we are seeing is a considerable shift in terms of where the money's flowing, who's got it, who hasn't, and that's partly this intergenerational wealth shift that I've touched on, and I think this is a really big deal. There's about 6 trillion of intergenerational wealth coming. And that's going to have a significant impact on the market. But we've also got new money as well from other sources, and particularly, of course, some of the migration. And you've got this wonderful little picture here, which is really making the point. Right? You were there early, but you had a big queue.
Yeah, well, we've discussed what happened, what the multiculturalism really actually did to Sydney, into many parts of Australia, and that is, it's really polarized a lot of the cities, and this is where you've got to look at and pay very close attention as to the different markets. This is in your in the West. This is I took this video in a club over at Cabramatta, Canley Heights, and you look at the people. I mean, it took us forever to get served. Dusty and myself to get served. We had some friends for Yumcha, and it just took us forever to get served. It was absolutely fascinating to see the hustle and the bustle of that community, and obviously Dusty and Evan, they were picking up on the conversations on the adjoining tables, and they were all talking about property. They were all talking about rental incomes. They were all talking. It was all property, property, property. It was fascinating. It was like going to an Aussie barbecue on a Sunday afternoon after the footy. You talk politics or property. The same happens over in Cabramatta and Canley Heights, those areas with the community. But look, I know a fair bit about the history, because I spent a bit of time out at the back of Cabramatta myself, living there, and watching that whole area just develop, and what it became, what Cabramatta was. Many decades ago, it was predominantly Greek and Italian, and then it moved over to being, Vietnamese, and then you had the issues with the gangs and the T5 gangs and the drugs, and for good many years, Cabramatta was the drug capital of Australia. And there was a lot of crime there, and then after that, the locals kicked the gangs out, and now try to get in there with $1.5 million, and you'll be lucky to buy a parcel of land and a shack with 1.5. It's absolutely crazy. But you look at the people that originally built in this community, that built that area, Parramatta, Canley Heights, Canley Vale, the back of Bonnyrigg. Now they call it Bonnyrigg Heights, Busby, all these. There was a lot of Italian families. There was also a lot of Portuguese families back in the day as well, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and they had your 5 acre lots, and a lot of those areas were basically they were farmlands. They were just pasture lands and farmlands for garden farms that supplied Flemington markets and a lot of the fruit and veggie shops closer into the central hubs. Nobody really wanted to go out there. But now that you've got this polarization of communities, and not just around Cabramatta, but in other areas, you see how the communities have actually, you see the property values either increase, or for a time they even decrease in value. They plateau before they increase again, and it's all because of the communities. It's all because of the language they build. They build the communities around the language, around the culture, shops, shops, stores, and schools for that matter, and also places of worship. So where you once considered farmlands, now they become huge development plots, and even further out towards your Badgerys Creek and the airport. I mean, where nobody wanted to go there, mate. And this is what I call the new Australian money, the new Australian money. And because of these communities polarizing into certain central hubs, you've got one thing that's going to happen with property, and that's going to go up in value. No matter what you have, it's going to keep on, because of the demand around those communities, and that will come from interstate, overseas, not necessarily from the place of origin, because a lot of these people there also were Vietnamese Chinese. A lot of the landowners were Vietnamese Chinese originally, and then you got your Vietnamese refugees, and the cycles keep on going, and you just witnessing all these things happening. So this is what I call new money. Apart from obviously your WeChat chatterers, apart from your silent tigers, the new money brick coming in from India, and your Kryptonians, and your desperate housewives, those that are making new money. So this is the inflow, or the new the new influences, or the trends that are influencing the buyers that are influencing the markets. And then when you've got little old Joe and Mary, that they're blue collar workers, or even white collar workers, and just getting your average $90,000 a year income, trying to get into the property arena in Sydney, it's very difficult. And let alone buying a property, rentals are very, very hard. So and you've got all these dynamics at play that make it very, very difficult. And of course, then there's a big elephant in the room that nobody really wants to talk about. And this is why you've got what we have, and then you've got to ask yourself the question, Martin. Are markets crashing, or are they rising?
Yeah, very interesting. And you've made a post on this as well. And I'm fascinated by this discussion because, of course, we had the clearance rates, which were significantly low this week. Now, was that the long weekend? Wasn't a long weekend, I think, in Brisbane, but, most other places, perhaps there was. Is this a temporary blip? Or is it actually true that the forces that we've been describing, which is effectively credit being extended at twice the rate of inflation now, if you look at the credit statistics, more people are borrowing more. We can see also the shift of intergenerational money and the new wealth, all of it which is chasing property. So the question is, well, what's going on? And the answer is, of course, Edwin, that, this high level story about everything's going up or everything's going down, everything's crashing or everything's rising is not actually anything like the truth. You need to actually much more go into the detail. And, we try to do that here. But there are significant areas of Sydney and indeed other places around Australia where prices are still on the up. And the expectation of many is that that will continue as interest rates are cut. Now, I'm a little bit more skeptical of that because I'm not sure necessarily that we are going to see this massive acceleration amongst younger households. The reason for that is the affordability problem. Even if rates come down a bit, the income growth is still a lot lower than house price growth. So effectively, affordability is stretched. But for other people, the chances are that they can pay more. And as we've said before, Edmund, I think this is really important. When you actually stop and think about it, if you're buying a property for investment purposes and you're going to convert it so that each room is effectively a room to let out, suddenly the yield on that property can be much stronger. And that means that you've got more capacity to buy it. Or if you've got 2 or 3 generations together buying a property, again, they can afford to pay more. So going back to, if you think about, the typical young Australian couple who've lived in Australia and are trying to buy, they're competing now on a very unlevel playing field.
Yeah, and this is where, and these are all the dynamics, and these are all the data points that that we try to bring to and share light on. Look, as I put up there on that post that you on X, well, this was an absolute shambles of an auction. The presentation was poor. I mean, it was more talking about the issues around it, and also, Martin, when you've got into these markets that are very choppy and very turbulent, where agents being the so-called professionals don't really know themselves what's going on, and they don't really they don't really care to know. They just want to do a quick sale. They don't really know what's happening around them. So it's interesting to see from this. Obviously, there was in the commentary underneath that post was absolutely fascinating how people viewed that post. But in actual fact, if you look like the subsequent posts that are put up there on X, and I explained it in more detail, what actually went on, the price point that the vendors or the agents were guiding, no doubt that was a price point that the agents put into the vendor's head. It was never achievable. It was never at that point in the first instance. Albeit it wasn't. It was they overshot the mark, and the presentation of the property was absolutely woeful. The potential of the property was somewhat dubious, and I would have, if I was policing that whole thing, I would have taken them to task, because there's no way that you could do what the agents were proposing to other potential buyers that they could do with the property, like turn the garage into a garage. I mean, it was a big garage. The house itself had 5 bedrooms. But when you start looking more in depth as the attributes of the listing, the more you looked at it, the more you realize that it could end up being a bottomless pit. And you could be spending a lot of money and then sitting there for a very long time before you get your money back. But so, as I said, in essence, in a nutshell, the property, in my view, was only really worth 1.1 or thereabouts. The one and only bid that was presented on the day was to the auctioneer was 1 million. I think they were guiding 1,250,000 at the time. Now they've got it up on private treaty sale 1,250,000 to 1,350,000. It's never worth that much. So these are the problems. This is what I was saying earlier on. There's so much confusion. There's so much noise out there, and then you've got an industry body that just adds to that confusion and adds to that noise, and people just don't know. A lot of people, you can say a lot of educated, but there's also a large number of people that aren't, and they'll fall for a lot of these tricks. So that was. So you, on face value, you'd say, shit, market's going down, but not really. When you look at the attributes of that post, and then you've got another post by Pete Wagent, and he's talking about property prices rising across the board in May. And I listened to the podcast just to make sure that I got the story right. And he's referencing CoreLogic's data. I mean, shit. I mean, there are markets that, like, again, on that post. If you were desperate to get into the market, that you read that and you say, shit, I better call my broker tomorrow, and I'm going to tell him I'm going to buy the next day. But it's not the case. So it's just an example. That's why I put are markets crashing, or are they rising? But this is what you and I talk about week in, week out, and that is the importance of being very analytical, the importance of being very granular when you're talking about the markets, what cities. I mean, we know for a fact that from my contacts in Melbourne that there are the market freestanding homes that you could today it's like they're dropping $5,000 a week in some parts of in some markets. So you just got to be very, very careful. But when you start coming across these sort of headings and headlines, or as I say, commentators, then you look at what are they really trying to sell? Like we said before, follow the money.
Well, follow the money indeed. And it's interesting, I mentioned the auction clearance rates, which were down, and the number of auctions which were down over the long weekend. But it's interesting that pretty much all of the coverage in the newspapers were quoting people who said, it's just a temporary blip. We're going to see significant price rises in the next few months as interest rates come down, et cetera, and quoting the old favourites of not enough supply, a lot of demand, a lot of people need to try and buy in property. Again, I think it's at an aggregate level not helpful. And even those CoreLogic numbers, if you look carefully, it's not uniformly spread necessarily, and that's obviously a bit delayed too. Remember, of course, that there's a bit of a delay between the numbers and what they actually produce. So whilst they actually talk about them being at the end of this period, actually the data is a few weeks older than that, probably because of the fact that you don't get the finalised sale proceeds being put into the underlying systems until somewhat later. So it's always a little bit sceptical. I had an interesting conversation earlier in the week with somebody up in the Northern Rivers. And, he lives up in the area, and he's in a relatively small town, and they've got thousands and thousands and thousands of land units being released to the market. And as a result of that, of course, property prices are really sort of going sideways or down. And so we were talking about the fact that, you can't generalize here about what's happening with CoreLogic saying New South Wales prices are going up. Well, I can point to areas where New South Wales prices are going down. So again, you need to understand the local dynamics, and you need to understand that a lot of the information is actually crueled by what agents are doing, overquoting, we've spoken about this in spades over the months and years. But you've also got the different dynamics in different parts of the state, and different types of property, units versus houses, all of those things. So, again, I think the critical takeout from this is that you can't definitively say everything's going up or everything's going down, just as you can't say there's a 100% chance the rate cut's coming next month versus not, although the markets are saying 92% at the moment, so we'll see about that. So I think people need to be just a little cautious and chill out a little, do the work, and make sure you understand precisely what's going on, and don't get caught up in the hype. There are, as you say, agendas here.
Yeah, and this is where once you start removing the emotion, from the transaction, you start seeing things a lot clearer. Uh, I know it's very difficult. I know it's easier to say, uh, but um, based on simple numbers for us, in a lot of cases, it just comes back to numbers. There are some markets of Sydney, Martin, where the numbers have been trending, and they continue to trend 30, 40% lower than they would normally trend. But yet the prices, the asking prices aren't really shifting any higher than what they were 6 months ago.
Yep.
Because there are some markets that are saturated right now, and it's gonna require um, another push. It's going to require something else to trigger that movement upward, if it's going to do if that's what's going to happen. And that generally comes by way of interest rate drops, by way of movements from demographic movements. But you see it more with you see it a lot quicker with interest rate cuts. And also a lot of it also is played by the local selling agents. Will create that sort of momentum. But in this case, in what's happening now, the strategy that would work for a lot of selling agents, of trying to create that crowd, or bring in the crowd, it's working against them, which
Yeah.
is quite interesting, quite funny. But it's also dangerous, as I put out. But I think the other dynamic there that we're going to be seeing is this sudden jolt of momentum from the foreign, like the groups that we've discussed. We're going to see a huge push by the WeChat chatterers, because from when we opened the discussion about 3 or 4 weeks ago with regards to how we're getting the mortgage brokers on call, let's not forget that it generally takes 3 to 6 weeks to get their approval. So I think we're going to see in a lot of the lower priced areas, we're going to see a jolt upwards because of the appetite that investors have, or because with the noise of lower interest rates, obviously that generates that interest, but also with what we're also noticing and seeing is the appetite for the new kids on the block, the Vietnamese community. They're also starting to rally with their mortgage brokers. We talked to a fair few agents there in their region. So it's interesting how these shifts and changes occur. But look, yes, housing in terms of construction is playing a role in the price movements as well, because of there's supply, but the problem is not. A lot of people just focus on supply, but not focusing on the actual fueling the immigration lever, as we've been discussing for a very long time. But look, I think what's going to happen, Martin, is we're just going to be moving, and we're no longer walking into, but we're now running into the scenarios that you guys are facing in Britain, and with regards to the new build nightmares that you've been experiencing. Ali G sent me this and sent you and I this this article, and I'd had an opportunity to read it before the rant, and it's just deja vu. I mean, they're right in the middle of it now, of their aftermath. And I think that this is where we're potentially we are going to be, or the governments are going to, take us down that pathway because of the simple fact that in order to build the numbers or the numbers that they want us that they want to have build, the only way to build those numbers or come anywhere remotely even to 30-40% of what they want to build is your high-rise developments. But this was fascinating to read the whole article. And I'm sure you're in your surveys there now that you're putting together, you'll start to get a lot more and more of these stories.
Yeah, well, actually, it's very interesting because the government in the UK is looking to build 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years. A bit higher than Australia, but not a lot. But the quality of construction, which is what this article was about, is absolutely abysmal. Same old as Australia, right? Firstly, poor materials. Secondly, poor skills. And a lot of corners being cut to try and actually squeeze the price. And then thirdly, building up, not just building out, and a lot of problems with some of the high rise that's been built in the last few years. We haven't learned anything, either in Australia or in the UK. We're building cheap rubbish. And what that means is that the costs of maintaining that property subsequent, whether it's an apartment or whether it's a house, is going to be a lot higher. So the wood's going to rot more quickly. The roofs are going to have to be redone more quickly. A lot of the damp problems will be there from day one. And interestingly, with some of the building standards, the ventilation that traditionally you would find in older homes is now being curtailed. So one of the other things that they're finding, particularly in the UK, because of course in the winter it gets quite cold, is the mold. So the whole issues about the right degree of ventilation is another big one too. So wherever you look, this rush to build and build at any cost is going to actually cost, and it's not just going to cost the builders, it's going to cost the subsequent property purchasers as well. And we're just building rubbish. And unfortunately, the mirror image is happening in Australia. I suspect the pace might be a bit slower. Maybe we're walking in Australia rather than running over here at the moment. But look, it's the same old. And we've already seen in Australia, of course, the consequences of bad building over the last 15, 20 years. And that's one of the reasons why strata fees, particularly in more modern properties, are just going through the roof.
Yeah, when you've got apartment blocks now that 3 years ago they were around 1,200 a quarter, and now they're upwards of 3,500 a quarter. You've got to ask yourself the question: why would I want to? Why would I want to buy it? But they're the choices that have been given to the younger people, to your first home buyers that want to jump in, either that or go into cheaper regions of other states. When you start comparing these a lot. What I found fascinating about the article as I read through it, Martin, was the speed of the decay of the bills. Hey, we got it on you guys. At least ours last, at least it's about 4 or 5 years before we find out how shitty they were built. I mean, the article's talking about within a year and 2 years, and I mean, there are some properties that face that here as well, but not to the extent of what the article was reporting. That was I was gobsmacked, but as I said, like you guys have ran into that problem, and we're not far behind.
Yep.
But that is it appears to be the MO of your government and our government in terms of what they need to do to satisfy the masses, because otherwise you're going to have a revolution on their hands.
Well, there's a big development that's been running for the last 3 or 4 years, not far from me here. It's several thousand homes, and these are mostly terraced or semi-detached houses built to a relatively low spec, quite high density. And I was talking to someone the other day who bought one from new, and they have not actually ever got all the problems fixed. So the builder sort of comes back and patches this and patches that, but then something else goes wrong. And in fact, they've decided to sell and try and get out And it's interesting that the average hold time of this property across the piece is just a couple of years. So people actually realize they've bought a lemon and they can't get it sorted out, so they actually just move on. And I think that's something that's really interesting. It also shows, by the way, that the value of those properties over the last 2 years have not gone up at all. In fact, they've gone down because of the risks of buying poorly developed property from new. And I think we're seeing precisely the same in Australia. And I've had a number of one-to-one conversations in the last few weeks with people who bought not off the plan, but bought a home and land package, as it were, and discovered subsequent that nothing was ever working correctly. So they had issues with the damp coming in around the guttering from day one. They had issues with the failure of the flashings and the outside coverings, which were specified to be one thing, but actually they did a cheap alternative because it was actually less expensive at the time. And now that's failing. So wherever you look, this same story. So we're building cheap, we're building quick, we're building for short term. And unfortunately, down the track, people are going to pay through the nose.
Yeah, and one of the other points there in the article was a reference to one of the developments where the poor bastards, now the value of the properties is zero, and they can't even sell them. They can't even I mean, what do you do? They can't get them insured. It is absolutely possible. But like I said, if you guys walked into it, we're not far behind, and we're picking and we're picking up speed. And the changes with the NCC that we've discussed in previous shows, and the changes to the to BASICs here, I'll share quickly this story. Talking to a jib rocker reached out, and I may reach out and said, "Hey, look, do you have an installation guy that there's one of my clients is building 5 homes down at Goulburn, and need to get some insulation put in." And I said, "Yeah, I've got a very reliable guy." So I called Chris, and then Chris, it was interesting what Chris says. Look, is it going to get inspected for AC? And I said, "What do you mean, Chris?" And he goes, "Look, what's happened now with the changes with the insulation, especially over the last few months, is it's increased the price of the wall insulation from $9 a square meter to $16 a square meter. There's not much of a change for the ceiling, but the walls it's what's creating a lot of havoc. Now, a lot of builders aren't putting the 2.7 in, or they're putting the lower grade materials, but it's a risk you take, because if it gets inspected, then they could knock it back. You could have issues later on. I mean, the last thing you want to do is find out that you don't have the right insulation after it's been sheeted, right? But this is the dangerous games, and this is the dangerous thing, that builders and developers are playing at the moment. And unfortunately, the buyers are none the wiser. So theoretically, because of these changes, you could put the cheaper insulation in, and if you got the cheaper insulation in, you may not have issues now, but you could have issues later on down the track, especially when you've got to have a 7-star rating. And as we shared earlier on, earlier in the year, with regards to the contracts of sale, potentially they're going to be required to have the property, when you're trying to sell it, you've got to have a star rating certificate, which is going to be another hurdle to jump through in order to get a mortgage. So these are all the things that are happening. But it's interesting how we're witnessing, or I'm witnessing at grassroots levels, the shenanigans that could go on. So I gave the prize to an old jip rocker mate of mine, and he said, "Mate, that's pretty hefty." But I explained to him what Chris explained to me, and the change that have occurred, and he said, I'll have to put it to the developer. I don't think he's going to wear it. So what do you think is going to happen, Martin? Do you think that that the developer is going to play hush hush, or do you think he's going to go by the book?
Well, I suspect there'll be a few cutting of corners around the place, and the trouble is, of course, it'll be hard to discover how much the corners were cut until down the track, right? Because these things don't necessarily pop up on day one. So this is a classic, and I'm seeing it quite often. And it just shows you that you need to be really cautious. If you're going to get a new property, make sure that the specs are actually maintained. And I believe that there's a role for an independent inspector to actually inspect the building quality through the construction process. Now, that shouldn't have to be. And of course, in the old days, the council would have done that. But of course, that's all outsourced now, so they don't have to do that. So I think there's a real problem here. And again, my experience and talking to one-on-one conversations is a lot of people have been caught out. So I think we're going to be seeing more. And I think talking about caught out, we should just switch the conversation briefly to BYD part 2, right? Because we discussed last week the questions about BYD, and the WeChat chatters have been on again because, well, we've had a little bit of conflagration.
Well, yeah, look, I got taken through the coals in some of the social media platforms with regards to the post and what we shared last week, over the week. But look, I'm sticking to my to Dusty's and Evan's sources over in over with the WeChat chatterers over in mainland China, and yeah, that's it. As far as they're concerned, it's BYD is the Evergrande of electric vehicles. It's inevitable. There's you don't get much news, or you don't get much of a feed now because it's all censored, for obvious reasons. But then on now Dusty captured this post. There was a carrier carrying something like 3,000 EVs heading from port in China to go over to England, and according to the story, according to what I've been told, one self-combusted, and then that's it. The whole shipload just on fire. That was only 3 days ago. So this is in the commentary. The commentary post the article is what was more interesting, and that is what people are saying, that the skepticism in mainland China with regards to the efficiency and the safety of EVs. One comment that was posted, I didn't get a screenshot of it because they deleted the post. One comment said, there was a ferry that goes from one city to another, and somebody said, look, there's a ferry that goes from one city to another, across the river, and one of his acquaintances that had a EV wanted to get on the ferry, and the company said, the ferry people said, no, you can't. You can't. We won't allow the EV on the ferry to. It's only a 45-minute journey from one side to the other. And they said, no, we're not allowing EVs on the ferry. So then he said, well, I made up my mind that when ferry companies around China allow EVs on ferries, that is when I will buy an EV myself, something along those lines, which is rather poignant, right? So then, obviously, we're here not to talk about BYD. We're not going to talk about the EV movement, or if you're pro or against, but it's really going to how is that going to influence our markets? And then, so I asked Dusty and Evan to see what the WeChat chatterers here in the local groups here are talking about, and the common theme with the chatterers here with regards to these stories that appeared and disappeared in mainland China is the fact that they all start talking about, well, what about the parking lots here in shopping centres? What about but more to the point, that's focus on the Monday evening property rants, is what about the parking lots in high-rise developments where you're going to have a lot of these Chinese EVs, if they're self-combusting, it doesn't mean that just because are we going to import EVs that don't self-combust? Are they only going to self-combust over in when they're getting shipped to Mexico or to other parts of the world, but not Australia? So you got to think about these things, and people are going to have to think twice about safety and aspect of safety and where they're living. I mean, we raised that story with the issues around charging when you've got Uber Eats riders and electric bike riders and that, and charging the batteries inside the apartments, and what a problem that's going to create, and that's creating. I'm sure that there's a lot more happening, but it's not being reported. But I mean, this whole thing around electric vehicles, scooters, bikes, it's one of these things. People are going to have to are going to take stock of what's happening, and those decisions are going to also impact on what they buy and where they buy and how they protect themselves.
Absolutely. I think this is a really important point. And, I noticed that we've had a few issues here in the UK too with some of the EVs, going up and creating issues. So I'm not sure that the full story is being told here. And of course, there is big agendas from many different quarters, but it does make you think, doesn't it? Talking about making you think, you've also gone into the issue of open the floodgates. And, this is a little tweet from you: cut the rates, open the floodgates. If you believe the golden visa is left with Dutton, think again, says the WeChat chatterers, which is quite fascinating. So, we would expect to see, more people being invited to come in. And as Pete Wargent highlighted, and, I've covered in an earlier show, that we're on a per capita recession risk now because the latest national accounts numbers show negative. Now, of course, the big difference was migration was down. So one of the real consequences of slow migration is, guess what? That, per capita, we're going backwards. So it just shows you that actually the momentum in the last 2 or 3 years has fundamentally been thanks to this massively high migration. So they're going to have to turn it back on, aren't they?
Yeah, well, this is where again the WeChat chatters are trying to make sense of all this stuff. Now we're talking about the local chatterers, right? This is the conversations that go on, and what Dusty and Evan were reading today, and it goes back to the article that that came out a few days ago, where it said, the stats guy, it's legacy or let go. Baby boomers business owners face the final decade of work. So, because we started talking about, well, what are the next? What is what the WeChat chatters were talking about? What is the next potential tranche of migrants? And they're all. It's almost like they're singing in unison, and obviously some of these people are in these groups are associated with migration firms, legal firms and agencies. Now, and this is what I was saying, because what they're saying is if the boomers, the baby boomers, are basically in the last tranche of the life in order to maintain a business, but none of the offspring want to take over the business. Why? Because it's too damn hard. You don't get to work from home if you're running a cafe, if you're running a grocery store, if you're running a small workshop, or if you're running your traditional small business operation. And so who's going to take over? The kids certainly don't want to take over, and that was evident with the WeChat charters that we shared a couple of years back, when closer to 3 years ago, where we were saying they don't want to take over mum and dad's business. They've had it. I mean, in 2021 we started talking about it, because they turned their backs on the business, because they could see how policy changes. Back then, we were talking about the lockdowns, policy changes with, lockdowns wherever it may be. It was just going to, pull the rug from underneath them, but they didn't want to take that risk. That is why they started moving more and more into residential property. So now we've got a scenario where they're talking about, well, okay, well, at the end of the day, the SME is really the backbone of the Australian economy.
Yep.
And that is what's been decimated over the last few decades. and it's like it seems like the current government has it in for the SMEs. So unless you're a unionized business operation, you don't really get a fair go. I mean, it takes a hell of a lot of money to run to run a small business operation. I mean, I dread February of each year because that is when all my insurance policies for my business and the vehicles and everything else come in, and it's frightening, and that's just one of the many overheads that small businesses have. So this is why they're obviously talking about this. They're saying, well, what option? What option does the government have other than to cut rates and to again pull on the immigration level? But what what laneway or what carriage of that immigration lever are they going to pull? And their money is on high net worth individuals. Their money is on the golden visa. Now that's the chatter. That's the chatter that the money's on. Hence the reason why they are so bent on putting more money and investing more into established residential homes, freestanding homes. And if they've got no, if they, worst case scenario is your older style apartments that were built in the 70s or 80s.
Well, I think that's a good call. And, there's nothing that I'm seeing to suggest that the government has anything else up its sleeve other than pulling the migration lever again. And in fact, the latest data suggests that migration may be up again. Though, interestingly, if you compare the statistics in the national accounts with the statistics from the ABS and other sources, the numbers are all over the place. So you can make an argument that migration's going up. You can make an argument migration's going down. You can make an argument it's going sideways. So we'll have to wait and see how this shakes out. But there's no other game in town. That's the point, really. And like I said, the national accounts, which showed a per capita recession, was significantly influenced by the fact that migration was perhaps a little lower than people expected. So watch this space. And I think, it's part of the shifting foundations, and going back to my conversation later in the week with Harry Dent, that we have a fundamental structural issue where pretty much all asset classes are actually in bubble territory to an extent, and how much, of course, is the question. But then the question is, well, what is the government going to do about it? What levers can they pull? And what are the consequences of those levers? And to my mind, migration is part of the story. Now, talking about stories, Edwin, you told a lovely little story on YouTube, right? About three little vendors.
Yeah, well, that was in my new YouTube video. Putting out some stories. Yeah, so you've heard of the story of the three little pigs. So I tell the story of the three little vendors and their journey. Three properties in the eastern suburbs, and more to the point, it's really a story about the wolves than it is about the three little pigs or the three little vendors, and talk about what the unsuspected suspecting vendors get told they're going to get. And this is why I say, are prices really falling, or is it that the selling agents are shooting way over the mark, and then to get the listing? Because if you look at when we look at the numbers later on, we're going to see how they've been tracking. They shoot. They've got to get the listing, because if there's no listings, they don't eat. There's a postcode, the Menai postcode in Sydney has 10,000 homes. Menai, Alfred's Point, those areas have 10,000 homes. There are 30 listings or 31 listings currently on the market in that postcode. And guess what, Martin? There's 37 selling agents active in that market. So you can tell that some agents aren't eating. So therefore, you've got to tell porkies to vendors in order to get the listing. And this is, I have a number of agents that I speak with in there, and agencies that I talk to on a regular basis from that area. And it's the same old story there and in Parramatta in the northwest region in your upper North Shore with different agencies that we talk to, and that is the competition. So it's like they're all singing. It's like they all went to the same conference. Basically, in essence, agents are overshooting the price of the property by 10-15% in order to get the listing, and then they've got to work their darndest to work their heart out to try and bring the vendors back to reality. And they try to use the strategy of pricing it low to what you go. But at the end of the day, the winners are the selling agents themselves. The losers are the vendors, and followed closely by other potential vendors in the area because the price expectations aren't rising as quickly as what they would like it to be because of the bait advertising that goes on. So this is yeah. So they can go to my YouTube channel. It's still Just Think One, and they can hear the whole story there. Names and offers, names of agents and properties have been withheld to protect the innocent.
Well, I think it's worth going and checking it out because this is a really important point, and the agent dynamics here are really fascinating to watch. And I've had the opportunity to interact with a few agents in the last couple of weeks that I've done to one-on-one conversations. I always go and see what's going on in the local markets, and what they're suggesting is going on and what is actually going on is like chalk and cheese. You sort of say, well, hang on a moment, my data is telling me one thing, you're telling me something different. I wonder who I believe more. We'll leave that hanging. Let's just quickly go and look at the numbers because the numbers are quite interesting. On the 2nd of June in Sydney, 20,281. On the 9th, 20,187. So, hardly any movement. And it's interesting. If you look at the chart there, you can see that listings are still a bit higher than last year. Going sideways. We're in the winter season now. Perhaps that's not to be expected. In Melbourne, 26,443 on the 2nd, 26,338 the week later. So just a slight reduction. And in Brisbane on the 2nd, 3,593 compared with 3,453. So a little bit of an easing back. And as I said, the auctions, well, last week, of course, was a little bit weird. Next week, maybe or maybe not. I'm not as convinced as some that we're going to see a significant spike in auction clearance rates going ahead, though, Edwin.
Yeah, it's not so much about the auction clearance rates, I think, Martin, clearance rates. I think it's more to the point is, what's really happening out there? The last 9 weeks have been absolutely dismal for the number of auctions or properties taken for auction. What is really going on? This is where you and I know that a lot of vendors are now being are educated. That is our why we that is our primary position. There's a lot of education, but and also the disappointment and the dismal disappointment by the locals watching how other auctions get passed in, that they don't achieve the prices that the agents told them they were going to get, and where you're talking about $200,000 for a two-bedroom apartment in one market of Sydney in your eastern suburbs. That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money to not to get. So that this is what's at play. So I think both vendors are being educated, and I also from what I saw on Saturday on the ground, I can tell you that the auctions that we attended there, to watch the markets in some parts of Sydney, mainly in the west and northwest region of Sydney, the buyers are also become more educated, and they're not listening. They're not. They're becoming a lot more. They're equipping themselves a lot more, and they're standing the ground. But this is the nature of the season. It's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen moving forward, and as we ride winter out. Is the same trend going to is it going to be consistent through sprint? Because that will be the telltale sign. I kind of think that I kind of think that agents and agencies are more prepared to listen to offers before auction, and because of the numbers. To them, it's not so much the percentages of the clearance rates as it is the numbers. Because as you and I know, if they don't sell it typically or through their campaign in the private treaty post the auction, then they know that they it's going to be the competitor that's going to sell the property. So yeah, it's interesting to see how a lot of the shenanigans that have been going on by that agents have been playing is working against them. And as I say in my videos, bad luck.
Yeah, absolutely. And the story I think will be told in the spring selling. We'll know a lot more then. But I do think that people have become more educated. They're becoming maybe they've been watching this show, Edwin, and hopefully those who have are
100%.
forearmed, forewarned. But the auction route is not necessarily a good play, particularly with agents being more and more desperate to try and get any sale just to keep the wolf from the door, literally. Let's just briefly look at the rentals. So in Sydney on the 2nd, 11,444. A week later, 11,726, so a slight rise. In Melbourne on the 2nd, 11,693 compared with 11,886. So in both cases, we're seeing slight rises, which is quite often what we see this time of year through the winter. And as we come to the end of the show, Edwin, you've just got time for a quick thought, and this is quite a potent one.
Look, yeah, with all the shit that's going on over in America, right? I was, going through my X feed, and is havoc around you? Is it an opportunity, or is it a closed door, or or is it an obstacle? And it's interesting. I follow Andy and go for been following for a while. An interesting character, and he put this post today, or sort of come through the feed today, and it says Los Angeles. An older Asian woman collecting bottles left behind by far left open border riders at their insurrection. Well, outside of that, outside of what's going on, and I watched the video, it was absolutely. I mean, this is you either see havoc, you see turmoil. It's either turmoil or havoc, or an obstacle, or closed door, or you see it as an opportunity. What a what a statement that elderly Asian lady put out. She saw an opportunity. There's a lot of bottles, plastic bottles that could take to the recycling center and get 5 cents, or a dime a dime for every bottle. There's an opportunity. So what are we doing? So that was made me reflect on, we can whinge and bitch and complain, which a lot of people do online, and a lot of so-called property commentators do online. But they're always talking about the havoc. They're always talking about the problems that they're facing, not facing, this and that, and they don't see the opportunity. And I say this, and I say this with authority, Martin, because a number of commentators that are actively bitch and whinge and complain on X about property prices. I have spoken to them, and I have given them an opportunity to buy, but they're so hell bent on wanting to be in one specific area, and that's it. But as I keep on saying to them, unless property prices drop by 60%, even then you won't be able to afford that area anymore. That ship has sailed. So this is, to me, that was the message that I got from, and also from the other communities. And you look at the migrants from back in the 60s and 70s and 80s that went and started growing veggies out in Whoop Whoop, and now they're sitting on a fortune. You know, that, they saw, it was uh, havoc, chaos. You know, they got to Australia, and then they took that opportunity, went out west, southwest, northwest, and now they're sitting on valuable land that's been either acquired or sold or developed.
Yeah, there's an old phrase called "every cloud has a silver lining." Right. And, if you know where to look, there is sometimes opportunity amidst the chaos and amidst what's going on. I think that's an important point. But also, of course, it also says that for one person's problem, somebody else might benefit. And I sometimes wonder whether we've actually created a property monster where, in fact, there are some benefiting, but there are also a lot of people who are not absolutely benefiting. They're being crushed by it. And, the question is, where does this play out? And that'll be something I'll chat about later in the week. Edwin, I want to say thank you very much for the rant today. As normal, lovely to see you on this holiday. And we will do it again next week. And, of course, there will be more shenanigans to discuss, won't there?
And more opportunities.
Absolutely. Take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you, man.
Bye-bye.